I can't see whether I'm muted or not. That's fine. So I think we should start now. We have some 40 odd participants here today.
Yeah.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the event today under the Climate Smart Healthcare webinar series. This is the 7th webinar that we are hosting, and the title for today's webinar is Strengthening Healthcare Resilience in Flood-Prone Areas. So we started this Climate Smart Healthcare webinar series in 2020 with an aim to showcase the innovations and climate smart stuff happening in healthcare facilities in India, both in private and public healthcare facilities, and also to educate the healthcare healthcare sector in India about what entails climate smart healthcare and what comes under the ambit of climate smart healthcare. So the speakers for today are Dr. Anil Diwan, Dr. Basant Kumar Pradhan, and architect Niyati Gupta. My colleague Sunila Dikshit will introduce the speakers in detail in a few minutes. Before starting the webinar today, I would like to briefly introduce the organizations involved in hosting the event today. And I'll run you through a brief presentation on that. So the Center for Chronic Disease Control, under which the Health and Environment Leadership Platform sits, is a New Delhi-based non-profit organization which was established in December 2000. The mission of CCDC is to address the growing challenge of chronic disease in varied settings of developing countries. And CCDC primarily tries to achieve its goal through knowledge generation and knowledge translation. CCDC has also been recognized as a scientific and industrial research organization by Ministry of Science and Technology, Government of India. The Health and Environment Leadership Platform is a partnership between Public Health Foundation of India, Center for Chronic Disease Control, and Healthcare Without Harm. I'll introduce other organizations in the subsequent slides. So the Health and Environment Leadership Platform is the India arm of Global Green and Healthy Hospitals. We currently have a membership base of 74 members who represent the interest of over 7,700 public and private healthcare facilities, and also showcasing the interest of close to 30,000 physicians in India. The platform basically focuses on three main themes, which is showcasing leadership in health systems and reducing the environmental and energy burden of the healthcare systems, and advocating for the importance of intersectoral collaborative policy making to address the health impacts of environmental pollution. And we also build capacity of physicians on health impacts of environmental pollution. Another organization is Healthcare Without Harm, which is an international NGO which works with an aim to transform the healthcare sector worldwide to become ecologically and environmentally sustainable and to become a community anchor for sustainability. Also a leader in a global movement for environmental health and justice. Together with the partners around the world, Healthcare Without Harm shares a vision of a healthcare sector that does no harm and instead promotes the health of people and the environment. Over the last 2 decades, Healthcare Without Harm has had a significant impact on the healthcare sector by working with health professionals, major health systems, ministries of health, and UN bodies to reduce the health sector's environmental footprint and mobilize the sector as an advocate for environmental health and justice. Global Green and Healthy Hospital, which is again an initiative of Healthcare Without Harm and the Health and Environment Leadership Platform, is the India initiative of Global Green and Healthy Hospital. It is an international network of hospitals and healthcare facilities. Also, some of the global health systems are a part of this initiative. Global Green and Healthy Hospital. Global Green and Healthy Hospital currently has a membership base of close to 1,500 members in 72 countries across the globe.
Mazroor, 1 second. Dr. Pradhan, could you please mute your microphone? Can you do it at your end, Mazroor?
Yeah. Sure.
Thank you.
So
Sorry, go ahead.
that's fine. So Global Green and Healthy Hospital has close to 1,500 members across 72 countries in the world, and they represent the interest of over 43,000 plus hospitals. That's it for now in terms of introducing the organizations. Now I would like to invite Dr. Purnima Prabhakaran to talk briefly about climate smart healthcare. Why smart healthcare? I mean, what is the importance of climate smart healthcare, and why should the healthcare system and healthcare facilities become climate smart? Over to you, Dr. Purnima.
Thank you. Are you able to mute?
Yeah, I'll just check, and would like to announce also that all the participants, please mute yourself so that we can have a smooth conversation over here.
Sunila, if you can just make a quick call and.
Yeah.
So thank you, Mazroor. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon to all the esteemed panelists who have joined us today, as well as the participants in this next edition of our webinar series, the Climate Smart Healthcare webinar series. So as Mazroor mentioned in his introduction, we work very closely with both the public as well as the private healthcare systems in India, working with them to move the needle for the climate and health agenda. And the reason we do this is because, I mean, this has now become a cliched term, but it is because climate change is a health crisis. It is the biggest public health challenge of the 21st century, but we also speak about it as the biggest public health opportunity of the 21st century. And now more than ever, I think there's more and more discourse around the climate crisis and what we can do as different sectors in kind of addressing this global problem. And as people working with the healthcare sector, we have taken it upon us, along with other stakeholders, to work with the health sector in India to become climate smart in their healthcare delivery. And when we talk about the concept of climate smart healthcare, we are basically talking about two pillars within this. One is recognizing the fact that acute climatic events impact not just health, but also health infrastructure, and can cause immense harm by, on the one side, increasing the disease burden due to acute climate events, whether they are floods, droughts, heat waves, wildfires, poor air quality. All of these acute climate events are going to so on the one side, it is important for our health sector, both the public as well as the private, to prepare themselves to deal with this additional disease burden that is going to come on them. And we know now that the public health infrastructure has already seen one crisis where we realize that we have a very inequitably distributed health infrastructure for one, but also that one that is not very adequately prepared to deal with unusual disease burden. And with the climate crisis and the increasing disease burden, we need the health sector to prepare. And that is the concept of adaptation or resilience within the health sector. There is also this other concept of mitigation. And when we talk about mitigation, it is the concept of the emissions from a particular sector. So we know that, for example, industrial activity, agricultural activity, transport sector, all of these cause greenhouse gas emissions. Paradoxically, the health sector, which is supposed to deliver care and do no harm, basically that is our Hippocratic oath, also contributes to greenhouse gas emissions. And a recent report coming out of work done by Healthcare Without Harm pegged this figure at about 5% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. So 5% of global emissions, which translates into, just to put a different lens to it, it's emissions from about 500 thermal power, the coal-fired thermal power plants. And if all the hospitals and health systems were put together around the world and ranked along with countries, we would be the 5th in the ranking. So the health sector has a very significant contribution to greenhouse gas emissions. So that concept of addressing the emissions from the health sector is the concept of mitigation or greening of the health sector. So this concept of both resilience as well as greening or mitigation of emissions on the health sector care delivery is what we together call as climate smart healthcare. Fortunately, in India, this is no longer a new concept. People are becoming more and more aware of the need for climate smart healthcare. And at the highest level, we have a commitment from the Ministry of Health, from under the Prime Minister's Council for Climate Change. The National Health Mission was put together in 2015, and the National Program for Climate Change and Human Health was initiated in that year. And we have a very active program secretariat at the National Center for Disease Control under the Ministry of Health. We are fortunate to be recognized as the Center of Excellence for Green and Climate Resilient Healthcare within that program, along with a number of other institutions who are working on different aspects of climate change and human health. So this webinar series that we are holding is basically not just awareness building, but also knowledge generation as well as knowledge sharing on the different aspects of climate smart healthcare. And we have done various topics. We have looked at, for example, building infrastructure. I think we have done energy efficiency. We have done water efficiency. We have done different topics. Today, I think we have a very special topic, and I think it's very timely, the resilience of healthcare facilities in a particular situation of acute climate events, that is a flood-prone situation. And we're very fortunate to have a very esteemed team of speakers, and we also have a representative from one of the states, a flood-prone state, Orissa. So without further ado, I will once again welcome all the participants and thank you for joining us. There are some participants who join us every time, and I think this is a very important, I see this also as a training of a trainers, so that you carry the message forward in whichever capacity you are joining us here with your healthcare facility in your states. And handing over now to, I think, is it Sunila who's taking over to introduce the speakers?
Thank you, Dr. Purnima. So hello, everyone. Let me introduce to you our speakers for today. So we have with us Professor Dr. Anil Diwan, who is the head of the Department of Architecture at the School of Planning and Architecture from New Delhi. He has been teaching hospital programming, planning, designing, and construction and project management of healthcare facilities for more than 40 years now. He has also acted as an advisor to many multilateral institutions like World Health Organization, World Bank, Bureau of Indian Standards. And currently he's the Vice President of Institution of Hospital Engineering India and is also affiliated with the International Hospital Federation. Our next speaker is Niyati Gupta, who is an architect with a master's degree in urban development and management. Presently, she is pursuing her PhD in disaster resilient healthcare infrastructure from the School of Planning and Architecture at Delhi. Her area of work is on giving solutions on climate resilience, healthcare architecture, programming, and planning. And today we also have with us Dr. Basant Kumar Pradhan from Odisha. He's currently serving as the State Nodal Officer for Climate Change. He has his MBA/BS degree from MKCG College from Behrampur and also has a background in public health management. He's also working as the Joint Director for Disease Control under the Public Health Directorate of Odisha. And today he'll be talking to us about his experiences from managing the health system of Odisha during the times of cyclones and floods. So over to you, Niyati. You can share the screen.
Yeah. Good evening, all. I'll just share my screen and let me know if it's visible to all.
Yeah.
Is it visible? Yeah. So I'm going to run the presentation in the PDF mode only because I think it would be convenient to run it online in this mode, right? Okay, so thank you for the introduction, Sunila, and thank you for inviting us, the team from School of Planning and Architecture. Being from the Department of Architecture, our focus is, however, on the design and planning lines of hospital infrastructure or healthcare infrastructure in a broad way. But we also look into the managerial aspects of it, particularly from the aspect of facility management and and towards human resource management or the staff management as well. For this particular topic, the focus is majorly given on resilience towards hydrological disasters or towards planning in the flood prone areas, right? Okay, so for this purpose, the points that we have prepared for the discussion, which is to be done in half an hour's of time, is where we want to introduce the concept of healthcare resilience or resilient hospitals, the climate risk profile of India, the kind of risks that is posed on healthcare infrastructure in India due to the extreme weather events, which is one of the effects of the climate change now on. Then what exactly would be the definition of resilient design in terms of healthcare, not just in like resilience per se, but what contributes towards healthcare design. Conception of healthcare designs, as in where we'll be discussing the components of resilient designs, which is attributed towards the physical infrastructure, social infrastructure, socio-economic attributes, certain technical attributes. So all these attributes we'll be discussing. And lastly, which is the core part of it, which is the healthcare design and planning consideration for medium to large scale hospital facilities, and the government mandates of planning for disasters, which is the disaster management plan of hospital buildings in India. So these are the points of discussion that we'll be catering to in the next 25 minutes or so. Like before we get into any kind of discussion, one of the important things that I would like everyone's attention on is why exactly we are studying resilient hospital systems. What is the need of resilience to begin with, right? So even though there are a lot of definitions of natural disaster, as in like what constitutes as natural disaster. It could be geological, it could be hydrological, it could be due to the wind effects, or in most recent times, the pandemic. So all kinds of epidemics, pandemic, they are all categorized as a natural disaster. However, there are a lot of contentions it to be a man-made also, but let us not get into it. So pandemic for the past 1.5 years now has presented us with a lot of opportunities and a lot of challenges at the same time, as Dr. Purnima rightly said, so that this is also the best time and also the worst time. What happened was, like, during any kind of a disaster, there is an increment in patients, that is the patient surge in any kind of a healthcare facility, be it a primary healthcare, secondary or tertiary care healthcare facility, right? So in order to accommodate that sort of surge, the already scheduled surgical inceptions of the healthcare area are reduced. By what? So what do you mean by that? So like, let's say there is a like patients which are already been coming to the OPD of the hospital. So the amount of patients which are there for their chronic ailments, including cancer or heart disease or diabetes or any kind of cystical problem or any kind of a routine procedure. So all of those procedures are hampered, which in turn reduces the the capacity for the hospital to cater to those patients, so that the surge which is coming due to the aftermath of the disaster can be catered to, right? So one of the reports by Deloitte India suggested that overall decrease in the OPD and OPD of the hospitals have been reduced to more than 50%, right? So that is one of the prominent reasons why exactly we need to invest into resilience and why we need healthcare resilience to begin with, right? So apart from the patient surge and the ability for the hospitals to accommodate, we also have to cater to a lot of red signals that is coming up by various organizations, including the IPCC latest report in 2021, right? Which is giving you a red flag of the increment in the extreme weather events, especially the hydrological disasters. So over the past 2 decades, more than 80 million losses have been reported just because of the hydrological disasters, including flooding, urban flooding, and flooding within the building itself, right? Or it is flooding which is caused by the extreme precipitation extreme precipitation or the downpour of the rainfall within 3 days of the time, which is supposed to happen over the months period, right? So given the exponentially high increase in the urban areas, which is to say that the urban areas will be increased by more than 50%. So imagine the quantum of concretization that will happen in all these urban areas, and with the adverse effect of climate change and, so to say, extreme events or extreme precipitation, imagine the quantum flooding that is going to happen, which is going to cause further loss and damages to the critical infrastructure of any kind of a city, right? So we have to cater to the impact that is caused by the hydrological disaster or the increment in the hydrological disasters. Now, another relevance of getting into the resilient hospital facilities is that after the union budget of 2020, India, like the government of India, decided to increase the healthcare expenditure to 1.5%, right? However, if we look into, so this we decided in 2020, once the pandemic already has striked, and then everybody got into the mode of getting into the National Health Mission of 2017, which already stated that, you have to increase the state's capacity or the state's fund in investing into healthcare infrastructure by 8%. So in contrast to that, if we look into the other developing countries, including our neighboring countries like Bangladesh and Nepal and Bhutan, they have already invested more than 2.2% of their global GDP, right? So it is not like India has still, we are still far behind given the other developing what the other developing countries are doing. When you look into the developed nations of what they have invested into these resilient hospital facilities is already more than 8%. So imagine the gap that we have to fill from 1.5% to 8.1% after 75 years of independence, right? So it is not to do with bringing down upon the negativity on the healthcare sector, but it is to present a dire need of investing more into the healthcare sector, be it primary, secondary, or tertiary care, right? Now, another issue that is faced in India is that WHO prescribes that one doctor is to be available for every 1100 patients, right? Whereas if you look at statistically, if you look at the condition of healthcare in India, that one government doctor attends to more than 12,000 people at once, which is already more than 10 times what the WHO recommends, right? And if you look at, so this is a pan India figure. If you look at the state level figure, so in Bihar, one government doctor serves more than 28,000 people at once. So imagine what the standard says, what on an average India says, and what exactly is happening at the local level and at the state level. So there is a huge pressure on the staff, on the medical workers, on the healthcare workers in general, be it medical or non-medical staff, that they have to cater to the patients. So in no way we are, adhere to the standardized or the prescribed rate at which we should. So, so in order to bridge that gap, not only in terms of funding, but also in terms of providing these healthcare workers, is a dire need. So, which of course, makes the healthcare more resilient in turn. Apart from this, there is an increment in the both risks and vulnerability, which in turn caters to a lot of pressure on the healthcare sector. So any kind of a hospital facility, from a nursing home to a medium scale to a large scale hospital facility, requires a rapid turnover. so that it can accommodate more patients as as it caters to, especially after the a disaster has struck. So in the second wave, we have all observed the kind of patient influx that was there, and
Looks like
Yeah.
friends.
I think
Niyati, you're frozen currently.
we've lost, I think she's lost her bandwidth or
with 2
something.
lives. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Now you speak again. We lost you for some time.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. So when we are talking about increasing vulnerabilities and increasing risks, we are also talking about rapid turnovers, right? So that there is a decrease in the amount of time spent of the patient in the hospital facilities. So in the second wave, we got to hear a lot of news about how there is a patient influx, there is no bed availability, the hospitals are running out of power or their own resources, not only in terms of oxygen, but in terms of any other kind of critical services that it can provide, right? Especially for the patients who are on the who have high organ failure and high dependency patients, right? So there's an increased pressure in the critical units. It demands rapid turnover of the patient. That is, the patients are to be treated as fast as possible so that the infrastructure is able to cater to more influx of patients, and also to create an environment where the healthcare workers are also not affected. So it is not only about the patient being treated at the healthcare facility, but it is also about mental health of the healthcare worker as well. So we are dealing with 2 lives, not just 1 life. And of course, we have to look into the legal perspective of the medical care that is given to the patient. And in all of that, media also plays a huge role in portraying what kind of risks and vulnerability that the end user is being going through, right? So we have to account all these factors while talking about various kind of risk and vulnerability towards the healthcare infrastructure or critical infrastructure in general, right? Now, after March 2020, not only the resilience term, which is coined by the national and international organizations, people who are working with climate and healthcare, also the new term of compounding risks came into action, or not just in action, but came into fashion as well. So what do we exactly mean by compounding risks? So like in the very latest example, with the cyclone Taukte and cyclone Yas, which originated from on the either side of India, and the pan India, the effect was observed. So already the healthcare infrastructure was in huge pressure due to the patient influx of because of the COVID-19 pandemic. It was compounded by the risks of cyclones and flooding pan India. So this is what we call as compounding risk, where you are not only catering to the risk of the pandemic itself, but you are also catering to the disaster risk also. So when we are talking about climate risks or climate resilience towards healthcare infrastructure, we also need to cater to all these attributes into mind, right? So there could be like some sort of a knock-off effect or a cascading effect or a compounding effect on the healthcare services, where disruption in one thing can disrupt all the other function also. So it's sort of like a chain reaction, you see. Like if one thing topples down, it's like a domino effect when you say. So one thing goes down, everything goes down. So let's say if you're in the calamity if one of the component of the health, let's say there is no electrical supply, the building is withstanding, there is a patient, there's a availability of healthcare workers also, everything is in place, but there is no electricity, what will you do? Nothing. So that is what we are calling called as compounding risk, or the cascading risks that we are talking about, where one thing hampers the entire system. So why exactly resilience is important? Because it caters to the entire system and not isolating one thing at once, right? So these are the kind of risks that we are catering. So now, before 2020 or 2019 to be precise, most of the government interventions, government and of course international interventions, including WHO, were talking about hospital safety. So hospital safety is usually taken into isolation of one component, like for example, safety of the electrical ducts, or safety of the critical care units, safety of the triage areas, right? Resilience, on the contrary, talks about the entire system's ability. So basically, safety is a part of resilience, where resilience gives you a macro level picture. Healthcare safety, it is due to with the micro level things. Resilience is a macro level effect which caters to the hospital safety, right? So when you come down to defining resilience, so resilience is the system's capacity to adapt to unexpected challenges. So what is an add-on to a resilience is its capability to not only mitigate the risk, but also to adapt to the new normal, right? So if, let's say, if all the medical functions are toppling down because there is an infrastructure damage, resilient infrastructure should be able to quickly adapt to the new function or the new structure to it. So for example, even if the existing structure is not working, there is a provision of a planned provision of bus bars and all, so that a temporary facility can be quickly erected so that it can replicate the existing facility. So that is what resilient healthcare resilience is all about. Now, when you come down to the components or the dimensions of resilience, looking into the key terms of it, it is the healthcare infrastructure's ability to resist. What do you mean by resist? It is to do with limiting the damage to the critical infrastructure services, to be able to mitigate the risk, which is to do with the response mechanism of the entire hospital system, to be able to recover from any kind of a minor or major losses and shocks, the external shocks, and its ability to adapt in terms of delivering the healthcare services. So all these components together makes any system a resilient system. In this particular case, resilient healthcare system. So what are the critical services in the hospital building? It is the MEP services, or the mechanical engineering and plumbing services, or building engineering services, you can call it as. Any other critical infrastructure, which is critical infrastructure in terms of electrical supply, water supply, solid waste management, and all these kind of infrastructure and services that we are talking about. Another component is the ambulatory services, or the emergency response mechanism of the hospital facility, where exactly the patient would park, how it would access the healthcare facility, how it would access the emergency areas, how it would access the other essential areas within the hospital building. So it is not only the accessibility of the transport services, but within the hospital buildings as well. Of course, it is medical services, coordination, control, and command system through information, communication, and technology, the service, structural stability, and of course, spatial flexibility, how one spaces can be converted into other, so that we can accommodate the patients. So these are the critical services of the hospital buildings that we talk about. Now, when it comes to project planning, the major concerns regarding conception of any project is the need assessment. What we mean by need assessment is analyzing the urban context. So for example, if you are placing the hospital in a particular neighborhood, the amount of like the population density or the urban context is to be assessed. Not only the amount of patient influx is to be projected, but the entire environment and the ecosystem of the site placement is to be reviewed and assessed before conceptualizing any project. I mean, this is for the new construction of any project. Now, the feasibility report of any kind of a project has to cater to the detailed project report, to the design basis report, which all caters the planning and architectural attributes of the hospital campuses, right? And of course, it also comes along with a lot of sanctions and administrative approvals by the local authorities, including all kind of ULBs and development authorities, right? And all of these measures have to be penned down before making a detailed project report or or floating a tender, so to say. So once all these things have been included in the client brief, then only it can go into the tender documents, and thereafter only a construction manager or a architect or a planner or people in the construction industry, which are which are executing these hospital buildings, can implement it. So this is the conceptual stage at the project planning that one has to cater to. Sir, could you explain the planning of clusters from here on?
Now,
Yeah.
thank you, Niyati, for giving me this opportunity. So what happens is that the building professionals or as architects, the biggest contribution we can make is in the configuration of the buildings. So in design for earthquake resistant architecture, or when we have multiple disasters. So suppose we have flooding and we have a possibility of earthquakes. So then what happens? The earthquake people say, place your heavy equipment on terra firma, which means in the basements on the firm ground. But the flood disaster people tell us, no, the basements would get flooded. So you do a stilted development, and on the upper floor, you keep expensive electronic equipment, which is very sensitive to water. So if it gets flooded and the equipment gets underwater, all the computer systems, the CPUs and the servers, they will get damaged and they cannot be repaired. So these are the forms. So there are these, if you look at the diagram, so there are simple planning clusters and there are complex forms. So if we go in for complex forms which are symmetrical for earthquake resistance, they are very good. So there could be conflicting requirements for various multiple disasters, and we have to take a professional decision as to how we do large opening in horizontal diaphragm, what are the kind of interior we do, and where do we put the staircases, where are the elevators, how do we pressurize them. So there is a fire risk. So there could be compartmentalization. There is more damage which is done by the smoke. Fire will come only, there can be no smoke without fire. So you have to take care of smoke first primarily. So you need smoke detectors, you need heat detectors. And so disasters and resilience and planning for multiple disasters and planning for flooding, they all go hand in hand. So we cannot, depending on where you are located. Suppose we have officer from Orissa with us. So on the coastal zones of Orissa, there are risks of cyclones, tornadoes, and tsunamis, and earthquakes, and fire. So there are man-made disasters, there are natural disasters, and as building professionals, so we have these airborne diseases. Now we have these problems of biological and so viruses. So we have to take care of all. So then, as building professionals, look at this. So there is a surgical center, and then the person is wanting to be operating. and we see this person who's changing a bulb. So the building professionals should come from outside. They should not disturb the clinical people who are doing the clinical work inside. So in this cartoon, it is very clearly explained that in an open patient, you can't be changing a bulb. Or we see in remote areas in India, sewer lines and water supply lines are going through operation theaters. So they will contaminate, they will have infection control issues and all that. So we have to take care of planning in terms of the walls, the ceilings, the floor, the equipment layouts, the furniture layouts, the services, the fire escape routes, and natural ventilation, daylighting, dilution ventilation, air conditioning, and the general feel-good factors and patient-centric designs and healing environments and all those things we have to take care of. So how do we zone the hospitals? So there has to be a horizontal zoning and a vertical zoning. So when we plan for multiple disasters, so there are basements. When we go high rise, the building has to have a foundation. So to do a strong foundation, we get into basements, and the basements will have all the services and all the areas which do not have any patient housings or any patient staying there overnight. So we could have a clinics, we could have a diagnostics, we could have a treatment areas, we could have a services, we could have a parkings. So then where is the emergency department? It should be the first building that we see from an entrance. It should be directly accessible from the entrance. It is lifeline situations, and we should not miss. A patient could be living now and not living after a few moments. So we have to, so in theory of hospital planning, the location of emergency, the emergency entrance, there should not be any overcrowding there. There should be ample parking facilities for the emergency vehicles. They should go drop the patients, get back their stretchers, get into the ambulance and clear the way for next. So because an emergency patient or an emergency bed is an emergency bed if it is empty. So then there should be space for surge expansion for when disaster strikes, when multiple emergencies happen, triage could happen, decontamination could happen. And in this COVID situation, we have to have negative air pressures. We have to take care of oxygen, medical gas pipeline systems, oxygen generators, liquid oxygen plants, and all these paraphernalia. All district hospitals and above now have to have their own oxygen generation plants. We cannot be dependent on supplies from outside. They could come 4 hours late, 6 hours late, but whenever we need the oxygen, it should be there within the campus. So we should have enough capacity for the surge demand. So then we have daycare, we have surgery, we have service floors, and we have the patient rooms above there. So we have wards, single rooms, double rooms, and high dependency units and all these things. So then what is the preference of functions at various locations? So in the basements, we have radiotherapy and nuclear medicine. But in flood-prone areas, when water would come into these things, these are very expensive equipment and they could get damaged with flooding. So we have to ensure that there is no water coming from below the ground, from sides and all that. So it needs high level of technology, high level of building science and building management, construction, architecture. So then on the ground floors, we have emergencies, outpatients, ambulatory care, diagnostics. And on the upper floors, we have where the samples could go and the patients need not be there. And above levels, we have gynae, neonatal ICU, pediatrics. So mother and child, we have together. And these should be at a lower floor, not very high rise, not very difficult to reach. And it should be, because then we have these maternity and these kind of patients also coming. And then we have the CCUs and the surgeries and ICUs and all that. So maybe go to the next slide, please. So then, there are irregularities in the building elevations. The north, the south, the east and west elevations are different because of the solar angles, the wind directions, and the local conditions. So we have simple facade typologies, complex typologies, and then we have the rigidity, the mass, and the considerations of upper floors, what we keep. So then there are differences in heights of different floors. So then we have surgical floors, OTs and diagnostics, which need higher floor to floor height, and then patient care areas, wards and all don't need all those many services at the ceiling level or above the ceiling level. We need the bed head pendant, the central pipe medical systems, and we need a lot of these plug sockets and points for the ventilators and the heart lung machines and all those things which come. And then there are pendants and there are floors which will give us supplies. So there is a concept called soft story. So in a soft story, what happens? There are stilts. Those stilts are very dangerous in case of earthquake. So for earthquake, these things are very difficult to manage. I think we've lost Niyati Gupta's screen. Niyati, are you sharing your screen now? We are not able
Yes,
to see.
yes. I'll
No
just.
hurry, no hurry. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you see it now?
Yeah, we can see it now. So maybe we could go to the next slide. So soft stories, soft flows I have talked about. So now, what is the sequence of planning? Location, location, location. So most of the times in public hospitals, the site is given by the state governments almost free of cost to the facility. So we don't get the prime locations we want. In future, hospitals would need sites where helicopters could access a site, which should not have very many high tension wires and things like that going. They're closer to the main traffic arteries and main roads and highways so that the trauma patients could come there. So what are the slopes? What is the drainage? What is the road access? Where is the emergency department? And where are the surge expansions to take place? So where is the refuge areas for all these flood victims? What will happen? Those community people would come to a hospital because they know that this is a building type which will keep functioning when we will have an emergency situation. So in case of a disaster, before the disaster, during the disaster, and after the disaster, the hospital building should be up and running. So we should have multiple supplies of electricity. We should have drinking water, sewage, drainage, and the building should be at a higher level so that, it does not get flooded. So there are various entry and exit points. So we have to do standby procedures, standby to a standby. And then we have to have supply networks wherein you could plug in and put your temporary field hospitals, as we call them in the army. So they should be able to have supporting infrastructure like for attendants and all those buildings. So we've talked about site planning, we've talked about the structure, the build form, the configuration, the shape, the services. So mechanical, electrical, plumbing, these are the lifeline of a hospital. So these are the arteries and veins, as you call it, from where all the supplies, the gases, the fluids, the water supplies, the sewage disposals, the effluents which are taken away from, as ma'am had said in the beginning, that we generate a lot, we consume a lot of resources, and we generate a lot of these greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and we are responsible for all the climate change which is happening. So we have to make safe hospitals, green hospitals, smart hospitals and hospitals which are good for our people. So now what are the references? What are the guidelines? We have to develop such guidelines for Indian situations, for Indian conditions. So the NDMA guidelines are there for India. The WHO hospital safety indexes are there. The FEMA guidelines and PAHO guidelines have to be adapted to the Indian situation. So I would request all the medical professionals, doctors, the people from ministries of health and the disaster management organizations to come together with the building professionals and give the Indian people the standards we need. So as the School of Planning and Architecture, we've taken this SWAYAM MOOC course, which is open to all, free of cost to all. The exam is happening in the second cycle very soon. The third cycle is to begin, wherein the course is called Emerging Areas in Hospital Planning, Design, Construction and Facilities Management. So it's the total cyclic process which will take care of all these things. So it's a multidisciplinary, intersectorial team approach which we are preaching and practicing and doing what we say, and it's open to all. So may we have the next slide, please. So we are thankful to all you people to be so patient, and we are open to questions whenever some questions are asked of us. Both of us are here to answer your questions. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I just read one question on the chat box. So it was asking, like, how can we retrofit in the existing structure? What are the things that we can do in the already existing structure, which is there in the flood prone area?
So we have to study the scenario. We have to see what is the micro zonation, what are the flood prone, what are the maximum levels, what are the flood levels which were there in 100-year time period, and then maybe there are ways and techniques of mitigating these in the existing buildings. So maybe there could be, I know of places where people raise the buildings, or we could give spillway to the water. We have to give alternative routes to the water. We have to ensure that the building does not come in the right of way of water. So the water is to be given channelization through some other routes so that it doesn't come and disturb our building. So location, 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 and locational aspects in a new building is very, very important. Now that we have an existing setup, we have to take care of how to deal with water. So no two patients are the same. No two sites are the same. Diagnosis before treatment and survey before plan. So we have to do a survey of the surroundings, and case to case solutions will be given. No prescriptive answers can be given which is generic to all. Thank you. This is what.
And another thing that I would like to add to sir's answer is, when it is already located in the flood prone area, the internal circulation can be well planned, because already the horizontal and vertical stacking has already been there, right, for all the departments and everything. But including proper signages and the circulations of not only patients but also for the staff movement also has to be categorically strategized, so that if at all the water comes into the infrastructure, the staff is able to manage that, like how exactly the treatment can happen at the upper levels, how exactly the patients can be shifted to the upper levels if at all, let's say, the basement gets flooded. So all these kind of interventions has to be taken into consideration in retrofitting any kind of facility.
So thank you. We have to give time to our next speaker also, please. You know, we shouldn't be eating away all the time.
Yeah, Sunila, would you like to introduce?
Sure.
Yeah.
Is the screen visible?
Yes, it's
Yes,
visible.
yes.
Dr. Pradhan, would you like to take over? I have shared the screen for the presentation.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes, sir, you're audible.
So, sorry. Thanks for all to giving my opportunity to speak something about Odisha. Healthcare during floods and cyclones. So, Odisha, natural disasters are common in Odisha due to its specific geoclimatic condition, which makes the state vulnerable for flood, cyclone, and tornado epidemics, drought, and heat wave. Frequent occurrence of natural calamities stand as a barrier to overall progress in the state. Next slide, please. In the total population in Odisha, 4 crore 19 lakhs 74,218 as per the census 2011. And rural population is out of that 3 crore 49 lakhs 70,562 and urban population is 70 lakhs 3,656 and total area covered 1,55,707 square kilometers and number of district is 30, total block 314, out of that tribal is 118 and non-tribal is 196 and the density of population 269 per square kilometers and total number of panchayat 6,235 and total number of urban local bodies 103 and total number of revenue villages 51,313. Next slide. So cyclones happened previously in Odisha. 99, it is a big super cyclone. After that, 213 Phylin and 214 Hudhud and 2018 Titli and 2019 Fani and 2020 Amphan and 2021 Yas. Every year the cyclone is coming to Odisha. Next slide, please. So we are managing the natural disaster cyclone or floods by functioning of control rooms 24/7 at the state, district and block headquarter level. And during normal time, the control room monitoring the preparedness activities during pre-disaster, disaster and post-disaster and identification of flood cyclone area based on the previously happened in the last flood or cyclone. So while hazard mapping, the areas completely submerged or marooned during the last flood or cyclone, it should be mentioned. And the casualty service and contingency plan for medical relief centers during disaster arrangement is made round the clock at all health institutions and opening up the medical relief centers and at strategic places. It is planned in advance and these are located in strategic places so that they can render service to the disadvantaged population. And mobile medical team also rendering the service regularly to the displaced person at the place of shelter and in marooned villages. And contingency plan for mobile health team and deployment of staffs. Mobile health team consisting of one medical officer and one paramedics to be mobilized from the district headquarters hospital, subdivision hospital, and non-affected block within the districts. And these teams, they are keeping readiness for deployment in the flood affected areas. And next is supply of drugs, logistics, and disinfectants. So ensuring availability of minimum 5 injection of anti-snake venom at PSNU level and 10 injection at CSC level and making available of ORS sachet at subcenter PSNU block headquarters, minimum 100 sachets of at the health worker subcenter level and 400 sachets of ORS at PSC level and 1500 sachets of ORS at CSC level. And ASA to be provided with ORS sachet wherever stock is adjusted, a minimum of 25 packets may be provided and stocks need to be replenished. And halogen tablets, 1000 tablets at each subcenter, 3000 tablets at PSNU and 5000 tablets of halogen tablet at CS level. And PSNU level, at least one bag of 25 kgs of bleaching powder need to be stored and for disinfection of the source of drinking water. And regarding ambulance sub services, all the ambulance of different health institutions of the district should be kept in readiness. Simultaneously, other vehicles have got to be repaired and kept in roadworthy as far as practicable. And in case of non-availability of institutional ambulance, the ambulance may be hired from RKS or untied from fund of NRHM. And wherever 108 ambulance is available, it must be utilized for referral of the cases. And disinfection of drinking water sources, ensuring safe drinking water is paramount importance to prevent the outbreak of waterborne diseases. And disinfection of all drinking water sources by bleaching powder must be taken routinely and frequently. And water quality analysis of different sources and distribution points is another important activity is pursued with the help of RD and RWSS departments. And tube wells or defunct tube wells are made functional and disinfected. And disease surveillance during the emergency, weekly surveillance system should adapt itself to a daily mode. Daily, the report is coming to the state headquarters from all the districts. And regarding health education, district mass media organization, electronic, print, and outdoor display are happening. And health service provider like medical officer, IUS, public health extension officer, and multi-purpose health supervisor, male and female, and multi-purpose health worker, male and female. They are propagating the message related to the personal hygiene, hand washing, safe drinking water, use of ORS, halogen and bleaching powder, food hygiene, and environmental sanitation to the Anganwadi worker, ASA, self-help group, and the villagers. And additional safety measures in case of requirement of motorboats by the district for medical relief operations, the CDMO, Chief District Medical Officer, to place the requisition for motorboats from respective revenue authorities in the advance. And the life jackets supplied to this district earlier, they are to be utilized by the health personnel while rendering the service in flood affected or cyclone affected area. And intersectoral coordination, District Natural Calamity Committee meeting to be conducted in the district in the month of May to ascertain the requirement of boat, life jackets, and other local requirements, if any. And keeping liaison with the district magistrate from collector, officials of related line department and NGOs for smooth management of medical relief operations. And the daily report in the prescribed format need to be sent to the state headquarters through email and fax by 3 p.m. of the next day. Next, please. These are the few pictures regarding medical relief center and cyclone shelter center and disinfection of tube wells and maroon village and shifting of the patient. These are the few pictures. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pradhan.
Okay.
Would you like
So-
to coordinate if there are any questions from the
Yeah,
audience?
yeah. So one of the questions has already been answered. There is another question lying in the Q&A box, and someone is asking, is there any concept of flood-resistant construction, unlike earthquake? If so, please explain.
What resistant? Niyati, maybe you take it.
Okay, so when it comes to flood resistance construction, so there is no particular guideline or a BIS standard that you can refer to, but it is mostly to do with planning in view of slopes and drainages, right? So according to the topographic survey and the soil assessment reports, the construction of any kind of hospital building or the entire campus is supposed to happen, right? So one is that is attributed to the
planning aspects of it. As far as the structural and the built form is concerned, so planning at a raised level is recommended for the new construction of the projects. For the building that has already been constructed into the flood prone area has to be assessed thoroughly again, according to the according to the soil assessment of that particular area and in view of the slopes, so that few of the departments can be shifted above than the already existing levels, right? So for example, like radiology and like departments which are radiology and diagnostics are, if they are placed on the lower floor or at the basement level, that can be shifted above, so that there is no destruction to the medical equipments and the placement of all these places, right? So so all of these aspects can be taken into account. Apart from these, there are guidelines by ASHRAE and FEMA, by the Department of Homeland Security, by the government of the US, which is particularly for the flood prone construction of medical facilities in the flood prone areas. These facilities can be of primary and secondary in nature, not for the, these are not applicable for the tertiary care hospitals, right? For tertiary care hospitals, you have to adhere to the NDMA 2016 guidelines, which are general guidelines for the disasters, not specifically for the flood prone areas, which lists down certain kind of structural and non-structural attributes of the building. So that is how you can take these kind of measures into consideration. Is there any other question?
Thank you, Niyati. No, we don't have any other question right now.
So we have guidelines on hill architecture, how on sloping sides we have to take care of the right of way of water. The building should not come in the way of any water channel. Otherwise, the water will sweep away the building. So these are basic oriental wisdom which our vernacular architecture had before, but now with tight sides, limited sides, whatever site we are given, people try to build in there, and then those buildings get washed away with floods. So we don't have to go against the nature. We have to go whatever site says, whatever are the planning principles, good practices, we have to follow.
Okay, so we don't have any other question in the Q&A box. If anyone wants to ask any question, they can write it in the chat box or in the Q&A box. Or Dr. Purnima, you can go ahead with the closing remark.
Yeah, so I will just kind of give my closing remarks over here. But before that, I just wanted to ask Professor Devan and Niyati. So you mentioned the guidelines, the FEMA guidelines, which is US based, and then you talked about the NDMA guidelines. We also I wanted to highlight at least, there is the WHO guidelines for climate resilient and environmentally sustainable healthcare facilities, which was released in October 2020. It does not specifically speak to the structural kind of points, but they do give guidelines for different scenarios. And there are interventions that could be done for healthcare facilities in flood resilient, in flood prone areas. So one of the things I think which you also mentioned was looking at for retrofitting existing healthcare facilities in flood prone areas. Look at historical flood levels, and then you decide what you can do. So some of the interventions that Niyati mentioned about, maybe you can restructure, reorient the facilities, move critical infrastructure to the higher levels, or provide stilts in terms of new buildings, or site your building in a place where that you're not in the right of way of water, that is flood water, for example. So there are different interventions, and I think in the recent times we have some guidelines. The WHO framework is one example, but I think it's important. I think the important point, the takeaway point for me is that, you know, you mentioned that there needs to be structural resilience for sure, but there's also got to be functional resilience. And I think you brought that out very nicely in the earlier part of your presentation, Niyati, about healthcare workforce and the personnel also being resilient and prepared to face the consequences of an acute climatic event. So that's an important part for functional resilience. So I think capacity building across the board, and I think at every healthcare facility, whatever tertiary or secondary or primary healthcare levels, I think it's important to have an action plan in place for whatever acute climatic events that region is prone to. So if it's a flood prone area like Orissa or Kerala, I think it's important to do that vulnerability assessment, the risks and hazards that they are prone to, and accordingly kind of, you know, work their way for different levels of healthcare to become more resilient. And I think we had some really important points there in terms of the steps to building your resilience. I think we will be sharing this presentation with people who joined here as well as other registrants who could not make it. And we do amplify this webinar through other channels that we have through our newsletter, etc. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. I think it's an important perspective to bring the architectural lens to healthcare professionals. You know, there is so much to learn from each other. And I think going forwards, these partnerships should be leveraged. And I hope we can keep an open communication channel between us to kind of handhold people who do reach out to us should there need be. So thank you, Professor Devan and Niyati and Dr. Pradhan for sharing those important insights about how you handle things on the ground as a state nodal officer for climate change. I think I will wind up with my closing remark will of course be to say thank you to the organizing team, my colleague Sunita Dixit, who kind of reached out to the panelists and put this together along with Mazroor's support. So thank you both of you. I'll hand over to you, Mazroor and Sunila, if you had any closing thoughts.
Thank you both, Dr. I think we had a wonderful session. We can close it. Thank you everyone. Thank you, Dr. Devan.
Thank you everyone, especially to all of the speakers who were very proactive. So yeah.
Thank you everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Very good evening.